Hello, everyone. We are live. This is Left Bank Books Presents Online. St. Louis native Eric von Schrader, who will discuss his new book, A Universe Less Traveled, in conversation with KDHX Earthworms host Gene Ponzi. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We are celebrating 51 years this year. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Eric and Gene, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted to the current situation and are currently bringing you online virtual events like you see here. We also have curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. So even if you are joining us from overseas, we can still send a book to you. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that our events are a way to expand your mind and make the world a better place. And it is with your support that we are able to bring these events to you. We hope that you support Eric von Schrader and Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you, a friend, or whomever on your gift list you think would be most in love with this book. And you can do so at left-bank.com. And I will put that up there. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore here through the most unusual of times. It helps us keep our staff employed, myself included, and it helps keep you in books, which is very important. So if you love books as much as we do, we thank you for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, so be sure to type those up as a question or as a comment so that we can get to those at the end of the event. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. And now for tonight's book. What if there were another world, almost like ours, but not quite? It brushes up against us like the tail end of a dream, but stays just barely out of reach. What if you found a way to go there? Billy Bustani stumbles upon the ability to slip into a surprising new version of his sleepy Midwestern city. He begins a journey that is the most fun he's had in years. Then it turns into an obsession that upends his life, his family, and everything he knows. A Universe Less Traveled tells Billy's story, framed by tales of other accidental travelers to this mysterious city, and provides a glimpse into an alternate history of the 20th century. Looking for an escape from the troubles of his failing business, Billy discovers a teeming metropolis with iridescent skyscrapers and throngs of immigrants and tourists from all over the world. As he explores, he meets peculiar allies and experiences raucous celebrations. Billy questions his sanity as he struggles to make sense of this bizarre world. Though he fears screwing up his adventure, he lets his college student daughter in on the secret. Together, they go further into this amazing place until they reach the ultimate destination, a magnificent city of Native Americans that has sprung up at an ancient site. There, she begins a relationship with a handsome young man with a startling plan. And Billy also meets a formidable enemy, the Knights, a shadowy organization with a mission to keep people like him out of their world. They reveal how the two worlds diverged a century ago and warn him to stay away at all costs. When his daughter disappears at the hands of the Knights, Billy and his wife go on a frantic search to find her in the other city. It leads to heartbreak, then to a new beginning. In his career, Eric von Schrader has made documentary films, produced television shows, and worked as an instructional design consultant. He was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and spent most of his life there. Eric has always been fascinated by the older parts of the city and their echoes of a lost world. A few years ago, Eric's wife and he moved to California. They've always wanted to live by the ocean. Still, the neighborhoods and streets of St. Louis are etched deep into his brain. And tonight, Eric will be in conversation with the incredible Gene Ponzi. Gene Ponzi has been an environmental advocate and resource person for the greater St. Louis community for over 30 years. As her volunteer community service, Gene produces and hosts the Enviro interview show Earthworms for KDHX St. Louis Independent Media. On her job as Green Resources Manager for the Earthway Center of Missouri Botanical Garden, she coaches sustainable thinking and practice for businesses of all kinds through the St. Louis Green Business Challenge, and connects her fellow humans to nature as a garden team leader of the regional initiative Biodiverse City St. Louis. Her column Earthworms Castings has been a local feature in the Healthy Planet magazine since 1997. She has also written for greenbiz.com, Missouri Resources, and professional magazines including The Designer, Home Energy, and the online environmental digest Grist. And without further ado, I am so happy and proud to be able to welcome Eric von Schrader and Jean Ponzi for Left Bank Books. If everyone at home would please give them a very hearty round of applause as we welcome them to the screen. Hello.
Okay. Hello.
Thanks, Shane.
Hi,
Thank you
everybody.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight.
Eric, hello, my friend. And it's good to see you in this context, celebrating a phenomenal story that you have written, a really wonderful vision that you have created of not only our hometown, our home place here, but how people could share the wealth and revitalize and that kind of thing. HD St. Louis is what you call it. What does that mean, Eric?
Okay. Well, my main character is a guy named Billy Bustani, who runs this kind of local chain of 3 or 4 electronic stores. They sell TVs and computers and DVD players, stuff like that. And this takes place in the year 2010, so about 10 years ago, which wasn't that far along in the past when I started writing the book, but now it's 10 years. And he finds this other place, as Shane sort of alluded to in the intro, and it's so much more interesting and exciting and vivid. And it's like, what is this? How did I get here? What is it? What's going on? Am I nuts, or is this something real, or am I just dreaming all this? He has no idea, but he spends a lot of time thinking about it. But one of the things he does is he's this is at the time when old-fashioned televisions became known as standard definition or SD televisions, and the new super sharp big televisions, which are all the televisions we have now, are high def or HD televisions. So he applies that metaphor, thinks about the two worlds he's going back and forth between. SD is the old one, HD is the shiny new one.
So I want to absolutely ask you about some of especially the greener features of HD St. Louis, but you framed your story in such an optimistic way. Frankly, I don't think we need any more dystopias now. We're pretty much living in one. How do you feel about having created that kind of vision and put that kind of vision forward, especially in this time?
Well, I that was a very conscious choice I made from the very beginning. I think even before the current craziness, fiction is full, particularly, speculative fiction is full of dystopias. I mean, they're on TV, and zombies and apocalypse and Mad Max and all that kind of stuff. And I thought I wasn't that interested in that. So I didn't want to do that. Then a lot of other, when I was thinking about this idea of a parallel place, a lot of other sort of cliches of that in my mind are that, it's this high-tech, super advanced wonderland, run by transcendent, transcendent intelligent beings. Well, I'd like that. So I wanted one that was like a little bit different, that was recognizable, but they'd done a lot of things differently, but it was still kind of the same place. And so I think it worked well, and I had a lot of fun kind of mixing up sort of futuristic stuff with just sort of oddball little details. And I think that's part of why it works. Because, and I have sort of an everyday schmo, my main character kind of showing up there, and one of the first things he does is he finds a bar, and he goes in the bar and makes friends, and he's not like looking at the magnificent vistas and everything. He's starting off small. So that was kind of a way I wanted to do it. But yeah, I made it sort of the St. Louis in many ways that I've spent my life dreaming of as I wandered around the city streets. Why isn't St. Louis bigger and more successful? St. Louis was so amazing 100 years ago. And I spent a lot of time reading those books and histories and things. It's like, and it kind of went off track, in my opinion. And sort of I think the people from 1900 or the 1904 World's Fair would be very disappointed if they looked at our city today. It wouldn't be. They would say, "How did it end up like this? We thought this was going to, be the gleaming jewel of the Midwest." So I kind of said, "Well, I'm going to make it be what I want. I'm going to have some fantastical things in there that are fun and interesting and positive, and mostly I wanted it to be fun and interesting. I wanted to make kind of a little adventure journey that the readers could go on with my characters."
Well, spirit of full disclosure, Eric, I am a lifelong avid reader. And over the last, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, I've mostly been reading factual stuff, some essays, but a lot of environmental stuff and, a lot of stuff online. I can't remember, frankly, when the last time was that I read a novel. So when I read yours, because I know you and I like you, we've known each other for many, many years, I thought, okay, what's this going to be like? And it was a blast. I had so much fun reading it. I liked your characters. I loved the place. I loved the vision, and I really followed the twists and turns in the story. And there's a couple of specifics about the place, especially I want to ask you about. But first, Billy Bustani, he's going around. He's got a little monkey on his back from his father, who, like you, has a strong relationship with media. Tell us about that.
Well, Billy Bustani grew up in the shadow of his father, who had started the business. And his father was one of these guys in the 60s, 70s, and 80s who was one of the sort of goofy, wacky TV pitchmen for his own business, his appliance store. And he did a lot of stupid commercials and became kind of a celebrity in town from these stupid commercials. And people who are on this call right now, who were old enough to remember those and were in St. Louis, probably know who I might have been inspired by to create this character. And they're right. There was a guy, and I'll say his name, Steve Mizrahi, who was everyone in St. Louis 30 years ago knew and got a chuckle out of or were annoyed by Steve Mizrahi. And he would, in my book, he was like not my book, in my opinion, what he did was fun and refreshing and sort of like folk art, sort of outsider folk art. He would just, he made it sloppy and stupid on purpose, and it worked. So I created a character kind of modeled, inspired by his commercials. Now my character is kind of a jerk to his family, and
Big Bill.
Big Bill. He was dominated. He's called the Duke of Discounts, which is the name of the store. And Billy, his son, kind of hated him, because he was very domineering. But Steve Mizrahi, I know nothing about, and probably none of that is true of Steve Mizrahi. Steve Mizrahi, for all I know, is a really great guy. I made up a completely fictional character inspired by the TV commercials that Steve Mizrahi made. And by the way, if people go to my website, ericvonschrader.com, I've got all kinds of photos of places where the story happens. And I have a tab called Inspirations. And I have a lot of things, including pretty much all the Steve Mizrahi clips that are available on YouTube. So people can check those out. So Billy was dominated by his father. Father dies suddenly. Billy's just out of college, and he takes over the business in the late 80s, and he saves it. But he's a workaholic for 20 years, and now it's falling apart for him because of online competition. Our buddy Amazon, in particular, And they're killing stores like his, and he doesn't know what to do. And his world is falling apart, and he's depressed about it. And that causes him to go run away from his problems for an afternoon and go down to South St. Louis where he used to live. And he finds himself in a particular place, the corner of Grand and Gravois, where by accident he ends up in this place that he'd never seen before that was there. And it's really kind of interesting. And then 20 minutes later, again by accident, he's back where he started, in the sort of standing on the sidewalk. And he's trying to figure out what happened. And that becomes his obsession, which leads him to keep trying. And after a few tries and failures, he figures out how he can actually do this on purpose. So he has kind of a ticket that he can go into this other place and check it out and do whatever he wants and then come back. And his basic story, in the first part of the story, he's really afraid of telling anybody about this because he thinks they're going to commit me to a mental hospital for sure. And so he doesn't. I'm sorry, my headset's sliding off. So that sort of leads to the beginning of the story and how the story starts to unfold. And he has various adventures in the first third of the book, say, where he starts seeing things that he has no idea what he's looking at.
Billy does. I mean, he not only goes to a bar, he goes to a fabulous street party, and he walks around and he sees some amazing things that he recognizes the parallels. Would you read a passage out of A Universe Less Traveled? Eric von Schrader, got to hold it up. Here it is. A Universe Less Traveled.
I'll hold it up too. Yeah, I've got tabs. I've got all kinds of stickers on mine. Okay, so set the stage. This is about the third time Billy goes there. And this time he went before, he went to the bar. And the people at the bar, he befriended this woman at the bar, bartender, and she said, they talked about music, and he liked music, and they were talking about that. Though, obviously, none of the musicians she knew about, he'd ever heard of, and none of the musicians he knew about, she'd ever heard of, which kind of puzzled him. He didn't really get that, but that was the deal. So she said, well, there's going to be a great party on Saturday on the street on South Grand. You should come. And he's been a workaholic for 20 years, and he's very kind of antisocial. He's not good at making friends. And here's somebody who invited him to something. He went, okay. So he did. So he comes back over that day, but he gets there early because he didn't want to take a chance on missing it. So he has some time to kill. So he walks by, and they're getting ready for this. And just past where the party's going to be is the corner on Grand where Tower Grove Park begins. Mm-hmm. And he had spent his childhood, because he grew up near there, riding his bike and running around and playing around. He knew Tower Grove Park like the back of his hand. So here is his visit, wandering through Tower Grove Park in HD St. Louis, because he has an hour to kill. Here's what happens. Billy crossed the street into Tower Grove Park. He strolled up one of the long central pathways lined by tall trees which filtered the early evening light. He hadn't set foot in the park in years. He saw young couples walking their dogs. A family was packing up its picnic supplies at one of the gazebos. The children ran around screaming and laughing as the adults loaded their car, a sleek, silver, lozenge-shaped three-wheeler. They have different kind of cars in HD. He watched a softball game on the fields along the Arsenal side. A handful of fans sat in lawn chairs, drinking beer and eating snacks as the team stumbled through an inning with shouted jokes and clumsy plays. The park was exactly as the one etched in his mind. Even in this strange version of the city, almost nothing had changed. Looking across the street, he could see high-rise buildings poking up above the trees, in contrast to the unbroken line of red brick homes and two families that lined his Tower Grove Park. But that didn't make much difference. The feel of the park was the same. Billy wandered farther to the main crossroads of the park. He saw the gazebos he was familiar with, and then noticed two additional ones. The first was in the style of a Greek temple, with white columns and a triangular frieze above that depicted children riding bikes and playing ball. The other had an undersea theme. Its columns were carved as intertwined octopus tentacles. A smiling octopus face hovered over the front entrance. A metal comb of mermaids and leaping dolphins adorned the roofline. These gazebos were nice additions. Ahead were the large pavilion, wading pool, and playground. To his left was the most magnificent of the gazebos, the Turkish one, with its red and white turban confection of a roof. For those of you who don't know St. Louis, that's a real one that's really there in SD. He wandered over to the lily pond and spotted a few tadpoles darting about in the dark water. No little boys were trying to catch them today. As evening softly descended, Billy heard the gradual rise and fall chirping of cicadas. He breathed in the long, slow waves of sound, which brought back the comforting reassurance that all was well in the world. A reassurance that went to long before his bike was stolen, something had happened to him as a kid, long before the customers started drifting away from his business. In the deepening darkness, Billy retraced his steps down the stately path underneath the trees. It was probably time for the street supper to start, and he didn't want to miss anything. After a few minutes, he noticed a slight green glow on the path ahead of him. It was barely visible. He saw it brighten and then fade. A moment later, a more bluish glow replaced it. What was this? Billy stopped and stared at the path to watch this odd phenomenon. And then he looked up. About 30 feet up in the trees, he saw swirling ribbons of green and blue. They silently pulsed like the northern lights. He looked down the path. The curling ribbons of light wove through the trees, crisscrossing over the path all the way to the end. They formed an enchanted canopy that was leading him back to Grand Avenue and the street supper. Billy turned around and saw that the canopy of light also extended back to the center of the park. And for a moment, he wondered if aliens had come for him, or if one of Don Juan's visions was coming true. And then it hit him. He was seeing the street lighting system for Tower Grove Park in this new, very odd and wonderful St. Louis.
So we see things sort of like that with LED lights and different shapes and different patterns and the intensity of color and stuff like that. That some of the technology in HD St. Louis is some of the best stuff I think that you've envisioned in A Universe Less Traveled, Eric. Two of my favorite things have to do with how trees are used and vegetation is used, and also have to do with brick buildings, which are very St. Louis centric. Talk about those two things.
Okay. I want to preface before I go into that. We're talking about a lot of St. Louis stuff here, and the book is very clearly rooted in St. Louis, and it's set in St. Louis. It's kind of about St. Louis in a lot of ways. But I do want to, for those of you who are listening, or your friends who don't know anything about St. Louis, the book is still really works. That was my opinion, and I've gotten many positive comments from some of the early readers who have never set foot in St. Louis in their lives and live in the East Coast, the West Coast, England, wherever, and they're telling me, I don't know anything about St. Louis, but this book's really fun. I really enjoy it, and it makes me want to go. And it makes me want to go there and check it out. So there we go, tourism. Okay,
that's good. That's good. Okay, and I want to add to that because place. I work in the field of ecology. Ecology is all about relationships in place, and these relationships take place in this place that you and I know really well because you grew up here, and I moved here. This has become my home. But there are stories everywhere that are set in a place that you can recognize in some ways, but that has twists and turns, and you've done a wonderful job of keeping a connection to the heart of a real place while transforming it into another dimension. So
Yeah.
trees and
Okay.
plants and vegetation and bricks.
Well, one of the things that they do in this imagine HD St. Louis that I made up and invented was that they're really into various kinds of ways of making the city cooler, temperature cooler, that are
Yeah, we
different
need
from
that.
yeah, I'm sure you do, and we all do.
Yeah.
But without sealing up everything and being inside in the air conditioning. Which has always bugged me about cities like St. Louis. Everybody's inside watching TV, and you go out in the streets, and there's not very many people around, or they go from their air-conditioned house to their air-conditioned car to their air-conditioned destination. I guess today we're not even doing that. We're staying in the air-conditioned house. So they have a lot of things to. That's a lot of trees and vines going up the sides of the buildings, hanging off the balconies, all over the place. That's a common feature. They also have a lot of some automated stuff like awnings over the street that retract and extend based on the angle of the sun. It's all automated. They have so a lot of and they have in some of the buildings. Billy notices when they're in the shade, the walls up above almost go away. So it's just like a thin curtain. It's like looking into a dollhouse. You can, people can open up their houses to get the breeze in. And so they do a lot of stuff like that. And part of why I'm advocating that, if I'm advocating anything, is that people should be out mingling and interacting and having fun and doing things. And so I tried to imagine a city where that was kind of the norm. That's what everybody did.
Yeah.
Then there's bricks. Most people know, again, anybody who's been around St. Louis and been in the city, the older parts of the area, everything is built out of brick. And the brickwork and the brick craftsmanship back around 1900, 1880s to 1920s, 1940s, is really amazing. And it's one of the most, again, often underappreciated. People kind of take it for granted, but these like little middle-class houses have this incredible brick designs on them. And it was a real thing. St. Louis was really a brick-built city. So in my world that I invented, I extended that into the future. So now bricks made in St. Louis and designs of buildings made out of brick, designed by people in St. Louis, by kind of famous architects, actually, become the huge thing in the world. St. Louis is sort of the Silicon Valley of bricks. It has that reputation. And the biggest company in town is called the Hydraulic Brick Company, which is the name of a 19th century company. And they have this like 80-story skyscraper right in the middle of downtown. And it's the company that is sort of like Anheuser-Busch was in St. Louis. They're like that, but more in terms of the consciousness of the city. But one of the things they did, the inventive people at the Hydraulic Brick Company, was they came up with a way to use bricks to generate energy, generate electricity through the heating and cooling of a building during the day, the outside of the building. Somehow you could rig all those up and get thousands of tiny little currents and have real energy and run everything. And that was an invention. That's part of why they and St. Louis are so huge, because this like revolutionized the whole world. And so I made that up.
But life pulled a fast one on you. You got a little surprise from none other than Washington University.
Yes, I mean, I made that up thinking it was pretty amusing, and also the most far-fetched thing you could think of. I mean, it's sort of silly and fun. It was like, oh, okay, we'll make electricity out of bricks. That's what they do in this other world. And then about exactly a month ago, there was an announcement by the real Washington University in St. Louis that they were doing research on using bricks as batteries and embedding stuff in the bricks, not necessarily to generate energy, but as very low cost energy storage, so that buildings could store energy collected during the day, say from solar panels, and actually use it all night long. So they're when I read that, I went, "You got to be kidding me! You got to be kidding me!" That this thing that I made up as kind of a joke in my story actually is they're doing something kind of similar. So
Yeah,
bricks may become bigger in St.
mm.
Louis's future yet. Bricks may be coming back, but I was into bricks before bricks were.
Yes, you were, and pretty much anybody who's from here. I mean, the day that I drove into St. Louis in 1974, I'd never been here before, and I was thinking about moving here from Wisconsin, the land of cheese, my home state. And one of the things that I noticed, trees everywhere, and that everything was red. Everything had that kind of terracotta look. Where I come from, it's all frame houses, and everything is really different. So, and we know that bricks store heat. Brick houses hold heat. So you hit on a little technological innovation there. This is another business related question I have to ask you, Eric.
Okay.
You have a character in your book, a universe less traveled, who's really out for himself kind of business guy. And he winds up coming up with an idea that is a win-win for business and for the average person. Tell us about that.
Okay. Well, let me tell you a little bit about how the book came to pass. First, I had this vision, which I've been describing for everybody, of character Billy in 2010 encountering this sort of unbelievable place and going, how did it get here and what happened? So then I realized that the story needed to kind of explain, well, how did it get to be that way? How did it get to be so different from our St. Louis? What happened? So in the story, and hopefully people will enjoy this, there are several chapters interspersed, which are sort of flashbacks to the 1920s and 30s and 40s, mostly tracing the story of this guy who is this sort of unscrupulous, flamboyant money guy. But he's brilliant. He's really brilliant. He likes being the center of attention. And there's a tremendous crisis in the other world of St. Louis in the early 30s, which I won't go into. We'll say you got to read the book. There's a huge crisis that's pretty much threatening the whole end of the city. The city could be totally abandoned. And the business leaders, he's the smartest of them all. And so he sort of decides, well, I'm going to tell them what I think they ought to do. And they'll listen to me because they don't have any other choices at this point. So he comes up with this idea to say, let's turn the whole city into a company where all the residents are stockholders. Everybody who lives here is a stockholder. And we'll own a share of the private businesses in the company. We'll own all the city government and all that stuff. And we'll turn it into a money-making operation. But only each person gets to own so much. So everybody's got a stake in it. And you get dividends. And so they try that. And it works pretty darn well. Because then all of a sudden people want to move there. Because only if you move to St. Louis can you get in on this. And if you leave, you got to sell out. So people do this. They pass it down to their children. They get a check every year. And that's how they sort of jumpstart the expansion to create this massive metropolis that 80 years later, our friend Billy encounters. So, and there's a lot of fun with his characters. His name is Jim Hines, and the stories with him are very amusing. And but also, I think I was trying to make a point.
I remember his name is James Whittemore Hines, and there's some
famous
famous Whittemores in local history.
I just borrowed somebody's name.
Yeah. That idea of the top people can make a bunch of money and everybody else, that you can have, that there can be a win-win. That was one of the most visionary things that I think you developed in A Universe Less Traveled, Eric. And it's a lot of fun to read how that cooks out and what people get out of it. I want to ask you about Billy's relationship with his daughter, Meredith. He comes from sort of a fraught father-son dynamic with his dad, Big Bill, the TV shyster, the TV character guy. But then there's a whole thing with his own daughter, and that's who he takes with him into HD St. Louis.
Yeah, he is but partway through the book, he's been doing all this by himself, and again, he's really tormented because he just wants to tell somebody. He's afraid to tell his wife. He's afraid to tell anybody else, any other adults, because he thinks they're for sure going to think I'm just delusional. That something's wrong with me. And he kind of through one hook or by crook, kind of ends up kind of getting cornered by his daughter, who's a college student, living at home, but a college student. And he, in the spur of the moment, as he tends to do things, he spills the beans to her. And she doesn't think he's crazy. She goes, "Really? Are you sure?" He goes, "Yeah." And then she says, "Well, could I go?" And he goes, "I guess so." And that afternoon, he takes her. And she's still pretty skeptical. I mean, when they're getting ready, they go back down to South St. Louis, and it's at the corner of Grand and Gravois. And people who know St. Louis may know the big, tall building there. And it's kind of a dumpy corner, kind of a, the whole area is not doing that great. It's got this sort of 10-story high-rise, which was built in the 1920s, which sort of has no business being there, but it's there. And that's the place where he knows how to get across. And when she gets there, she's grown up out in the suburbs. She's going, "This is where you go to the alternate universe? This place looks kind of like a dump." And he goes, "Shut up, don't laugh. If you laugh, we'll go home." Typical dad. And he takes her across. And she changes her tune pretty quickly when she sees that it's real. And she becomes an enthusiast along with him. And he kind of likes it because it's kind of, a father-daughter thing that he wasn't used to, that he didn't think he'd ever get again. And it's kind of their secret and their thing and their adventure that they're doing together. So that's where a lot of the book goes.
And then there's a lot more having to do with Meredith, Billy's daughter. But you, Eric, you are the father of a son and 2 daughters.
Yes.
How have your kids responded to this whole parallel universe, this universe less traveled that you created?
Well, I mean, they're my family, but no, they've really been excited about it. All my family has been and a couple family members, my daughters, and my son, and my nephew. Sometimes for a while, when I was writing the drafts and letting them read it, I couldn't get them to shut up about it. We would talk about it for hours. So it was a good conversation starter. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So they it's.
Some of the landmarks that people anywhere would identify about St. Louis, you have made some changes to. The Gateway Arch, obviously the most major thing that people identify with St. Louis. And then Eads Bridge, the engineering feat of James B. Eads. They have their own comings and goings in the areas where they are. Talk a little bit about those and how you're transforming landmarks.
Okay, well, the Arch was an easy one. I figured if they had a different history in this other world, they wouldn't have built the Arch. So they don't have the Arch. And actually, the handful of them who know about our world think the Arch is pretty weird. Yeah, that's why the cover is like
arch,
that. The Arch
no
disappears. Arch. Right, exactly. So they think the Arch is pretty weird because they're saying, in their world, the riverfront of St. Louis is this like the French Quarter of New Orleans. I mean, it's like bustling and nightlife and all this stuff. And they're saying, why would you tear all that down to put up a big sculpture? Well, I don't get it. Why did you do that? Okay, if that's what you want to do, it's your world, go for it. But they think it's pretty weird. But the Arch is kind of a symbol as people go back and forth. Even though some of the people who he brings over, one person he brings over who takes and shows him the Arch, is pretty darn impressed. It's pretty cool because I think I think the Arch is pretty amazing, particularly when you stand right next to it rather than look at it from. It's sort of a cliche when you look at it from a distance. So that was one thing that's different. And then there's a scene on Eads Bridge, and in HD St. Louis, Eads Bridge has something which I think is a pretty darn good idea. Instead of the top of Eads Bridge, which is sort of a road that a handful of cars drive on to go over to the casino across the river, that's about it. They've made it into this linear park, kind of like the High Line in New York City. It's a linear park with, benches and trees and restaurants and all this stuff. And it's a place where people go and hang out on weekends, and walk around. So that's what I did with Eastbridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a bunch of that stuff. Go out and walk around and be out around, and we're seeing some of that stuff now. Roads being closed so that restaurants can have more
Right.
outdoor seating. Those ideas of bringing ourselves out of the human-made environment so that we actually can interact with each other. Cahokia, Eric,
Okay.
one of my favorite parts of the whole vision of HD St. Louis is Cahokia that disappeared, and you have transformed it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think most of the people listening are aware, maybe not all, of Cahokia. And there's a place, Cahokia is a place that's about 6 miles from the Arch, not very far, over in Illinois. And there is a place, it's called Cahokia Mound State Park. And there is and that location, which has a large earthen pyramid that was built about 1,000 years ago. And 1,000 years ago, it was figured to be the largest city in North America, in what is now the United States. Mexico, I guess they had bigger ones. And it was considered to be, actually, at that time, around 1100 AD, probably had a larger population than London and Paris did at that time. So it was a big place. It was a big deal. And the culture that it was part of extended out from Georgia to Wisconsin to Arkansas to Ohio. It was called the Mississippian culture. And it was a really big deal, but everybody's forgotten about it. I mean, 99% of the people have barely heard of it. And that always kind of bugged me. I've always been a fan of ancient American civilization, and have been to Mexico and been to a lot of the places and all that. So Cahokia disappeared. Cahokia was a big deal for longer than St. Louis has existed. Right? St. Louis existed 250 years. So Cahokia was at its peak for at least that long. But it's gone now and forgotten. So I got hit by an idea that I almost can't take credit for, because it just sort of popped into my head. And once it popped into my head, I couldn't stop with it. And I started to think, well, what if Native Americans in the 20th century decided they were going to come together and build their own great city again, as a modern city, but as a Native American city? What would that be like? And what if they built it at Cahokia? So that's one of the things. After Billy discovers St. Louis, he then and his daughter learn that there's a companion city just a few miles away. And he ends up going there and being taken there by a Native American guy, a young guy that his daughter meets at a nightclub in HD. And so he's kind of suspicious of all this. He's dead, like, who is this guy? But then they go over there, and I can read you that passage. We just got a few minutes left, but I mean, it's short.
Yes, please do.
Billy and Meredith first see Cahokia. They're being taken there by this guy who she had met, this young Native American guy whose name is Diami. So here it is. They've taken a hydrofoil up a canal from downtown St. Louis, because that exists, to Cahokia, and they get off and they mill around a little bit, and then they have lunch, and then Diami says, "Close your eyes," Diami said, as they came to the end of a block. Billy and Meredith complied. He took their hands and led them around the corner of a building, now open, the Grand Plaza of Cahokia. They saw a vast space. Billy later estimated it to be about the size of 25 football fields. Small clumps of people stood here and there. Some were tourist groups whose guides waved flags to keep them together. Out in the center of the plaza, children were running back and forth, playing some kind of game. To their left, at the north end of the plaza, stood a stepped pyramid, 10 stories tall. It was the same mound of grass-covered earth he had seen many times before, driving by on the interstate to Chicago. But here it was, groomed and restored. The edges were sharply defined, and a structure with a steep roof stood on the top level. That's the ancient Cahokian pyramid, Diami said. We call it the Temple of the Ancestors. To the right of the pyramid, across the open space from where they stood, was a row of white multi-story buildings. They had balconies and terraces at every level. That's the university. My parents live in the second building from the left. The largest structure stood at the south end of the plaza. Its shape mimicked the ancient pyramid, but it was about 4 times the size, and it was made of glass. Smaller structures were visible inside it. That's the new pyramid, the Temple of the Children. It has the museum, visitor center, city governments, things like that. Why do you call it the Temple of the Children? Meredith asked. Because the new Cahokia is for us, the children, and for the generations of children still to come. Billy and Meredith took it all in. Billy had a huge grin. Even after the many surprises of HD St. Louis, he was stunned. So that was his first glimpse.
So Eric von Schrader, you have been a filmmaker. You have been a media guy. We both have roots in KDHX and its parent organization, Double Helix Community Media. You were on the board of KDHX when we went on the air in 1986. You have thought in, and you're a big film buff. Holy cow, you're one of the major film buffs I know. You've written something that would translate. It's a great book. It's a fun read, but it also could take another life. Got any aspirations along those lines?
Well, of course. Anybody who writes a novel imagines it as like, the next big thing on Netflix or, a film or whatever. I'd love to do. I think it'd be cool, but, what do I know? But, there's about 10,000 novels written for every movie produced. So we'll see. But any movie people who are TV people, read the book. Call me.
So
okay,
before I turn it back over to Shane, I just have to say thanks, Eric, for creating a vision that is inclusive and optimistic, and where prosperity is part of what everybody gets to tap into, and where nature is part of the picture. And it was a wonderful, uplifting read, even before summer hit. It will be good in the fall, too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, Shane, what's up?
Are you ready for some audience Q&A? I think they are
ready.
Very ready. We're going to start with a comment from Angela, because it very much applies to what you were just talking about. So Angela says, Cahokia Mounds is the first place my now husband invited me on an outing. And
oh, right. That's great.
Well, a very special place.
I've got about 60 pages about Cahokia. There's a lot goes on in the story. Near the end, but there's a lot in Cahokia, and I love Cahokia, and go Angela.
I did ask to see where people were joining us from, to see if people were joining us from St. Louis or other places, and a lot of people from California, someone in Kentucky, where else? Santa Fe. So yeah, a lot of people joining. I think that they will very much be able to resonate with the appearance of the city in your book. So
yeah.
All right. So now the Q&A.
Okay.
So Deborah asks, or says, I loved the diversity in the book. Was that deliberate?
Yes. Yes, it was. I probably wish I'd done more of it, but I definitely, made an effort to there's Native American characters, Asian characters, African American characters, white characters, all, and some are good guys and some are bad guys, and pushed together. So yes, that was very intentional, and I hope it worked, because I tried to paint that the kind of division and conflict we have in our world plays out a little differently in that St. Louis, and I actually have a little bit about how that came to be passed. It's a little bit more of our story of our friend Jim Hines kind of gets into that.
Deborah also says, "Hey, Gene, so fun to see you." So, yeah. All right. So the next question from Marcia: How long did it take you to develop your ideas? So maybe
Well,
even beyond just the writing process.
well, I really started the whole process from when I first had the ideas that led to this book to finishing of the book was about 5 years. But I was doing a lot of other things and I had some sort of unexpected interruptions. So it was not 5 years of constant work. And I wrote, it took me about a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years to write the first draft. And then I got kind of sidetracked for a while with some other stuff. And and actually it began with dreams. And I've told this story before, so some people may know it. But, the first things I had a series of dreams about 5 years ago where I would be at a certain place in St. Louis on a certain corner, Euclid and Maryland. But everything, the buildings and what I saw around me was very different. I mean, I had several dreams, and I could go put pins on a map of St. Louis and say where these things were. A few of them are in the book, almost as I dreamed them originally. Others, a lot of what's in the book is stuff once I had that inspiration, I imagined while I was awake in other ways. And many of the dreams I had didn't really make sense to fit in the book. So, but that was my inspiration.
Charlie is asking, will there be a sequel?
I hope so. I've started, but I'm not there yet. I got a long way to go. I had to sort of stop it for a while so I can get people to pay attention to this book, because I figure if nobody's interested in this book, then, well, why do a sequel? But I want to, and I did a lot of work on it last summer. Then I made some changes to this book, so now I got to make some more changes. But I will make that commitment. I'll get one together, and I hope it's as good as this one.
I know that a lot of authors that I've spoken with have been struggling with creativity during the pandemic. Have you been creatively putting out stuff now?
A little bit, not too much, because I've kind of been in marketing mode the last few months. Getting ready for today. This is the big day. Getting ready for that. So so I haven't done as much writing as I was a year ago. But I do have. I got a notebook here that's pretty full with with a couple hundred pages of stuff that's mostly related to what I hope will be the second book.
It's impressive.
But it's pretty raw. It's raw material at this point. I haven't even shaped it into a brick yet.
Becky is asking, who is your favorite author?
Oh, that's a tough question. Authors who I really like, who are related to this. I mean, I like people like Herman Melville and Moby Dick, but I don't think that really had much to do with this book. Kurt Vonnegut. I love the Kurt Vonnegut, Cat's Cradle, Sirens of Titan, Slaughterhouse-Five. I loved the sort of juxtaposing sort of super weird, fantastical stuff with mundane stuff and a little bit of an ironic sense of humor. And I think I've tried to do something similar. I don't want to compare myself to Kurt Vonnegut, but I mean the juxtaposition. So that's one. There's a fantasy writer named Terry Pratchett. Many people may know. He's done a lot, like 40 books that are extremely funny. I could never be as funny as Terry Pratchett, but I find Terry Pratchett so much fun to read. And so that would be another. Actually, one other person in the science fiction field who I've never understood is not as well known as he is a guy named Rudy Rucker, who wrote, yes, Shane is going, who's Rudy Rucker? Rudy Rucker he won like one of those big sci-fi awards for a novel he wrote in 1980 or 81 called Software, which takes place in the distant future of 2010. And he also wrote with a tremendous sort of deadpan humor and a creative thing. And I just loved it. And I've read that book several times. And here's 3 sequels to it: Software, Wetware, Realware, and Freeware. And you could actually buy them as a tetralogy called The Ware Tetralogy by Rudy Rucker. And though the first one has always been my favorite, they're very imaginative and bizarre, and also they make you chuckle. And that was a feel that I wanted to I had in the back of my head. I wanted to do something that would kind of feel like that. So.
Someone who is not me is commenting as Left Bank Books saying, we carry Rudy Rucker's books. So I don't know who else is watching from Left Bank Books, but there we go. So you can buy them from.
Yeah, well, good. I highly recommend people try Rudy Rucker, particularly Software, which is my all-time favorite. And I want to give a shout out to an old friend named Doug Gates, who used to be a neighbor of mine in Clayton. And he was the one who turned me on to Rudy Rucker. He lives up in Chicago now. He may even be on this call. I don't know. But he's the one who said, you got to read this. And it was very important.
It was Chris, who I believe is Chris Kleindienst, yes. The co-owner of the store. So, yeah. And yes. Gene has secretly snuck in a question asking can you tell us a little bit about the people you dedicated the book to?
Sure. From my book, I dedicated it to two people who are no longer with us, who were very creative kind of people in St. Louis who were good friends of mine, who really inspired me in how creative they were and how sort of tenacious they were to stick with it. And that was a lesson I needed to learn. The tenacity is one I need to learn. So the first was a woman named Sarah Lindquist, who with her husband, Robert Fishbone, painted a lot of murals around St. Louis for many years. He's still doing it. She passed away about 10 years ago, but she was extremely creative and a wonderful painter, which I couldn't paint a line, but was also just had this spirit of like taking joy and questioning everything in life and having fun and imagining, what if this and what if that? So that, and she was very supportive of me, anything I was doing. So that's one. The other person was a guy named Bob Reuter, who was a musician, had several bands. He was a radio host on KDHX and had what I think was one of the most spectacular, one-of-a-kind radio shows in the world, called Bob Scratchy Records. He was like a force of nature. It was so hilarious and so cool in so many ways. Every Friday, it just blew your mind. And then he also was a photographer. He did a lot of photography about the music scene in St. Louis, and he was an excellent photographer. And I knew I was good friends with him for several years, not for we sort of came together, went apart, came together. But he spent his life trying to do music, and he wouldn't do anything but his own music. And for most of his life, nobody gave a damn. Nope, and he played little tiny dive bars, and that was it. He never got any recognition, very little recognition, but he stayed with it. And towards the end of his life, he got much more recognition. He got a much greater reputation. And then tragically, he was killed in an accident about 8 years ago. So, but Bob Reuter also has always meant a lot to me. Thank you, Gene.
So one final question from Silver. Silver's asking, have you had feelings about a parallel city as you traveled to other cities?
Well, I've spent a lot more time in St. Louis than I have in any other cities. And, I've been other cities that remind me of what I think the parallel city is, but I haven't had the sense that I've had in St. Louis of feeling something different could be on this corner. And other people are kind of walking through me in some other world. They're here too, right where I am, but their world is different from mine, but we're kind of intersecting, but we have no awareness of each other. I've only had that feeling in St. Louis.
All right. I'm going to take one more question just because it's a really, all the other questions have been great, but I want to know the answer to this one as well.
Okay.
So, Andrea is asking, what did you enjoy most about the process of writing the book?
Mostly, that's a tough one. I mostly enjoyed the way that writing for me was, you sit down with not an idea in your head, nothing. And if you just play around, an hour later, a bunch of things have come, phrases, words, sentences, scenes, or I'd be out riding my bike or taking a walk around town or laying in bed, waking up at 4 a.m, laying in bed. And these just ideas would just sort of, the characters would start talking to me and I would see a scene unfold. And that's really a magical process that I probably resisted for a lot of my life. And when I embraced it, that's how I got this book done. So that's the best part. Proofreading is the worst.
All right. Well, yes, thank you, Gene. Yes, visual demonstration of buying the book. I want to thank you both so much on behalf of Left Bank Books. Gene, you are an incredible, I'm certain that you've been told this before, you are an incredible interview host. I'm certain that someone on the radio probably has said that before. So thank you so much. And Eric, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for doing an event with us. And it's been a pleasure to have both of you.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me, and I want to thank everybody who's been on this event. I can't see you, I don't know who you are. I'm really glad you came, and I really appreciate your interest and support. A lot of people supported me and gave me great feedback as I was writing this. There's a long list of them at the back of the book, so maybe your name's on there. Thank you all so much. Thank you all, Left Bank Books and Gene and Shane. And everybody.
See you at HD St. Louis.
Thanks. Okay.
Have a good night, everyone.